Nvidia recently released their open source GPU kernel module, and honestly, I think it's a great start. I did my piece on this the other day, and I think there are certainly some improvements they can make, but it's a great first step. And what's really great to see is there's a lot of people who are really excited to help. There's already a bunch of issues and pull requests being made, and this is even considering Nvidia's limited approach to actually being open source. Where the project isn't actually being developed in an open source fashion, they will take in the pull requests from the open source developers, but any of the Nvidia work is being done behind closed doors, and then the complete product will be released when the new version is out. And even with this weird development situation, this is the FOSS world at its best. This is when everybody is going to be benefiting from it. But not everybody has been as nice to Nvidia, and not everybody is operating in good faith or making changes they actually understand. You have a lot of commits where people are just blatantly trolling, like this one replacing every instance of the word driver with the word bomb. Or this one here where it's replacing the word as with us, because haha, funny butt joke, I guess. You have some people who don't understand compilers making changes they don't understand, like replacing I++ with ++i, which in certain cases will do different things, but when they don't, most modern compilers compile them down to the exact same code. Worse than that, they're getting into an argument about why they're right, even though everybody around them knows that they are wrong. You have multiple people making the exact same change to the makefile they do not understand, changing the capitalization of things that don't need to be changed, because clean in this situation is a target name and not just the word clean. There are a bunch of commits that have literally nothing to do with the commit name itself. This is fixed naming convention, and if we look at the commit, it's not fixing a naming convention. It is swapping around some logic, but swapping it around in a way that doesn't actually modify it and doesn't make it any easier to read. Granted, some of the changes are being made because Nvidia didn't make it clear what can and can't be changed because they didn't make their full stack open, so things like this, trying to remove Win32 stuff, this is actually being used over on the Windows side. Besides the people who are actually, just straight up trolling like these guys here, it seems like there is a lot of people in this repo who are trying to get an Nvidia commit onto their GitHub without trying to actually improve the repo in any discernible way. That's not to say that you have to make some big sweeping code change, and I'll get into that in just a bit. But all of this isn't just an Nvidia thing. Every single big repo on any of the public platforms like GitHub, GitLab, where literally anybody can spin up an account, share this exact same problem. And the Linux repo is an incredible example of this. So if you don't know, Linux is actually mirrored over on GitHub. Linus doesn't like GitHub as a development platform, but as a way to back up code, he's totally fine with it. For some reason, there hasn't been any pull requests in quite a while. Maybe they now have a bot that automatically deletes them. But if you scroll through this, there is a lot of pull requests that are basically just absolute garbage, modifying things that don't make any sense to modify. Not to say that every single commit is bad in here. Like, there are a lot of good commits where they don't understand the way that development is done on the Linux kernel, but there is an overwhelming number of them that are modifying things. Like, one I saw in here was changing a readme to be readme.md, but it's not a markdown file, so it shouldn't be MD. But there'll be things like merge pull request number 1 from Torvald/master, which don't actually have any changes whatsoever. It is just merging a branch in and making a pull request. The only difference in the Linux space and why I don't really care about it is no Linux development is done on GitHub. So none of the maintainers actually check what's going on here, and none of their time is being wasted. And that's the biggest problem I have. Wasting Nvidia's time. Nvidia has finally gone out of their way to actually do something nice for Linux, and while a lot of people are being very positive and trying to make actual positive changes, there is a lot of people who see this as an opportunity to be like, hey, Nvidia's got an open source repo. That means we control them because Nvidia bad. Nvidia bad, right, guys? Nvidia must go away because I don't like Nvidia. And really surprisingly, the Nvidia staff running the repo have been mostly friendly, mostly saying things like, hey, this commit isn't really that useful, or maybe we'll consider this at some point in the future. And they've even put out this message sort of partially explaining the situation, saying, hey, thank you for all the enthusiasm around the open GPU kernel modules. For the next while, we're going to focus on pull requests of functional changes. Please refrain from further cosmetic pull requests until we publish our style guide, because a lot of people are just making changes, for the sake of making changes. While many of these PRs make sense in the context of this driver or general Linux kernel modules, they go against the style guidelines of this codebase, or simply can't be merged into a shared codebase, as they would break components that are not published, such as the Windows drivers, tools like NVML, or the firmware builds. This is on us. We should have published better guidelines on how such changes should work. Until we do, it's best to just not make any cosmetic changes to minimize the churn. Are we tagging all such active PRs with the cosmetic postponed label? While making a project open source is basically free, all it really costs is the time in setting up the repo, and if you're hosting the repo yourself, like a couple of dollars to actually, set up the server. When it comes to actually managing an open source project, that is far from free. There is a lot of time that needs to be spent making sure the commits are actually good, making sure the pull requests are good, making sure they fit in the style you're doing, and especially when you're starting at the scale of something like the Nvidia project, there's definitely a very high barrier to entry there. And actions like this, trying to mess with the repo, is without a doubt part of the reason that a lot of companies avoid open source in their software. It's certainly not the only reason. There's a lot of companies out there that just don't want to make things public, but when they see the response that other companies get, I'm sure it definitely factors into the equation. Now, I want to talk about new contributors on a repo. Many times, a new contributor is going to take on some very, very simple task, and I don't want to dissuade any of those people from working on whatever project they want to help out, because not all small commits are being done in bad faith. For example, we have this commit here where there was a link sitting in the repo that was using HTTP instead of HTTPS. But when you went to the link, it automatically redirects you to HTTPS anyway. So there was literally no reason for the link to be in this form. And because this repo's been getting a lot of spam, you'd have some people downvote this and one person saying that this is basically just not a good commit. But no, this is a totally legitimate commit being made entirely in good faith, and this is a great commit for a first contributor to be doing. And this guy has an amazing take. This is absolutely not spam, it is a very good PR with good intent. Not only does it provide a legitimate solution, but it describes what the issue is and why it should be considered a problem. This is the definition of a legitimate contribution, even if it's rather insignificant change. Telling or implying that someone is spamming because you don't agree with the contribution is almost definitely very off-putting to new contributors. And there's this other one where someone identified a legitimate problem with one of their internal tools. Now, the name here and the description is absolutely terrible, and this is not the way it should be done, but what they noticed is there was a file in here that had a bunch of empty lines for the sake of empty lines. This was being caused by one of their internal tools that was generating files, and they thought they'd fixed it, but this output was still being shown. Once again, not a code functionality change, but still a totally legitimate change. Now, if they'd removed one line or something like that, sure, you could argue that wasn't being done in good faith, but they cleaned up all of the blank lines there, and now Nvidia knows the problem. And hey, maybe you go through the code base and notice a bunch of comments that have spelling mistakes and grammatical errors and things like that. It's not a complex change, but it is still a legitimate change being done with good intent. Sure, it's obviously better to be able to go and make code changes and actually improve the functionality of the code base. But even if you don't have that knowledge, you still can help to improve it. Obviously, not every project is the same in this regard. If you go through one of these suckless projects and then try to submit a patch that adds documentation, well, that's not going to happen. But if there's something in the style of the code base that you think you can improve, it's a great way to get yourself involved in the development ecosystem, learning the contribution steps, and then maybe in the future, moving on to something a bit more complex. With the kind of reputation that Nvidia has in the Linux space, I do feel some sympathy for them because at least for the first couple of weeks, it is going to be kind of rough. There's going to be a lot of people trolling your repos because I guess they just have nothing better to do with their time. And I want to see Nvidia improve, so please just don't waste the time of the Nvidia devs. If you want to go and troll some people, there are plenty of other sites to do that. Don't go and bother the people actually doing work. But over time, especially those people who are blatantly trolling, are going to get banned from the repo. And then hopefully at some point, Nvidia can just go back to actually doing their job and working on this software. But we'll see what happens. So let me know your thoughts in the comment section down below. What do you think about people trolling repos? Do you think it's just a bit of harmless fun? Or do you think it is actually like a big deal and you should stop wasting people's time? I would love to know. So if you like this video, I'm going to go and like the video. If you really like the video and you want to become one of these amazing people over here, go check out my Patreon, subscribe, selling Pay linked down below. I've got a podcast called Tech Over Tea. I've got a gaming channel called Brodie Robertson Plays. That's going to be it for me, and I'm out.